Hey guys, Sly here, and welcome back to another episode of the Caspian Game Awards. Now, I do know I've been very inconsistent about streaming, so before we actually get into this, I do want to preface a few things. So, I did not stream most of last week, because, well, of recent events that I really don't want to talk about for the sake of the stream here. I might talk about it in some of my other streams. But also, I've just been kind of focused on some other stuff anyways. I've been focusing on trying to get as much stuff done for school because I just got a lot of projects that just kept coming back to back to back to back to back, and it was annoying. And that kind of resulted in me being a bit more distant away from both YouTube and Twitch. So I hope you guys are at least understanding of that, because I'm not abandoning YouTube or Twitch. As a matter of fact, on Thursday, I'm actually going to be uploading a pretty significant video for me personally. And I'm pretty excited to showcase that to you guys, because it means a lot to me personally. So I hope you guys are at least understanding of all of that, and I hope you guys are pretty excited, because I've still got plenty of playthroughs that I have planned for the rest of the year, including starting tomorrow. And I don't know, it's just going to be pretty exciting to see exactly what we'll be doing. But, of course, let's get into the Caspian Game Awards for the year of our Lord here. It's 1999! We are back to the year 1999. Now, for those who don't know, for those who are new to the series, basically what the series is we basically make our own game awards and has specific categories, and we, give out the awards to games that truly deserve it. Obviously, the Game Awards itself didn't actually exist in 1999. They wouldn't exist until 2003. That's not stopping us from giving out the proper awards to games that came out in these respective years. So now it should be pretty obvious, if you can probably tell by my age. We're starting to get around to the point where we're going to be talking about games from before my time. But I'm not going to let that stop me, because there's a lot of games that came out of the 90s that really do hold up to this day, and I want to still at least give how I would have done the Game Awards had they have it existed around this time. And I still think this is going to be a pretty interesting conversation, because we've done the entirety of the 2000s, we've already done the 2010s, we've done most of the 2020s thus far, except for this year, 2024. I think it would be kind of cool to extend even further, though I don't know if I'm going to go past 1995, because not only was that where E3 began, which I know E3 Game Awards, they're different, but they're kind of intertied tied with each other for a long time. But also, gaming wasn't really taken super seriously, kind of in the first half of the 90s back. That, and also it's going to be extremely hard for me to figure out what games could work out for being nominated here the further and further we go away from the modern day. So I hope you guys are fine with me just stopping at 1995. Though if anyone wants me to do the first half of the 90s, of course, feel free to let me know. But regardless, we're going to be talking about, of course, it's 1999! Which, if I'm going to be honest, was a pretty damn good year. Like, I was genuinely kind of surprised with how many games freaking slapped from this year. It actually makes me wonder why people don't talk about this year in comparison to other GOAT years like 2001 or 7, because 1999 is up there as far as how great gaming was. Obviously, as with every year, there were some things that sucked, but especially in comparison to the last year we talked about, the year 2000, oh my god, that year was fucking terrible. Yeah, no, 1999 is significantly better. I don't know, like, I don't know. It's just weird that that happened with. Although to be fair, typically, transitionary years between console generations are typically kind of iffy. And I guess technically 1999 was the beginning of that because the Dreamcast came out this year. But I would still argue that 1999 was still firmly in the fifth generation of consoles. And I think it definitely benefited from that, as we'll get into this. But of course, before we get into this, let me go over the rules for those who are still new to this series. So, of course, I've kept changing the rules over time, but I think these are pretty much the rules that we have set in stone permanently from this point onwards. So, of course, rule number 1 is mostly about the nominees. So, of course, it has to be a game that released within the entire frame of that year. So, it had to have been released between January 1st and December 31st of that year, because guess what? We are not the Grammys. We do not do weird cutoff dates.
Don't yell at me, yell at the Grammys.
We're not like that. And of course, we're not doing weird cutoff dates, so yeah. Alrighty, of course, Crap Thompson, fucking say it again.
Don't yell at me, yell at the Grammys.
We don't do that shit. Fully within that year. And we are counting the initial releases of the games themselves. So it doesn't matter if a game came out in North America, later than somewhere in Europe or Japan. The Europe/Japan date would count in comparison to the North American release, because we want to be fair to when the game actually came out. Also, of course, only 4 to 6 nominees will be allowed because we don't want to bloat the list, and also we don't want to have too little games. So those are just general nominee rules. As far as the game of the year, it needs to basically just be a light game for the most part from the general consensus of the gaming community. Though, if absolutely necessary, I will start choosing games that I personally liked, which I don't think that's going to be a problem for the next few things, especially since, I'm going off of Metacritic scores, but you know how it goes. But it has to be a completely new game, so no remakes or remasters will be allowed. And, well, the biggest rule right here, I'm only going to be choosing games that I personally found interest in, and there's definitely going to be games that I will not be mentioning, that some people will be upset that I will not, but it's my stream, I can do whatever I want. So, but that's not going to be a problem for this stream, because, like I said, 1999 was a pretty damn good year for video games. Like, it was genuinely surprising with just how many damn good games that came out this year. So, and, well, that's reflective on the categories. Every single category is getting a nominee this year. So, that's awesome. Like, I didn't think that would happen, but that just really shows how good of a year this was. Easily top 10 best gaming years we've talked about thus far. So, that's awesome. I keep saying so, I'm sorry. But anyways, I think that's all I gotta really say. So, god damn it, I said it again. Fuck! And yes, the beautiful envelope is back, as always, with the choices on the little card here, because we gotta be professional looking, because it's funny. And yeah, I think that's all I've got to really say before we jump right into this. I will say, though, for this year in particular, there are going to be snubs. But of course, if you've watched the series, you know that there is an honorable mention there is an honorable mention section at the very end. So if I don't mention a game, it's most likely going to be on there, because oh my god, this year for the sim strategy, the racing sports category, it was a significant year for those categories in particular. And so if I don't mention a game, don't worry. It's most likely going to be mentioned later, because I like giving credit where credit is due. But enough about that, let's just jump right in, starting off with the best game by a new studio, which there were a lot of games in this category, which, of course, for those who are not familiar, this is not specifically the first game that a studio makes, it's the first game that got them a lot of attention. I make sure that I specify because it might be confusing as to why I don't nominate certain games for this category. Because people are like, oh, that was a popular game that studio made. Yes, but was it the first one that got their attention? So, and again, vice versa. If a studio made a game a long time ago that didn't get attention, but one game blew them up, that's the game I'll be focusing on in this category. And this year was a pretty decent year for that. Right here should show you exactly what I mean. So these alone should just tell you how damn good of a year this is going to be. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Let's start with motherfucking Silent Hill. You guys know how I feel about this game. It is a fantastic game in a bunch of ways. Of course, Team Silent would eventually make the sequels, or the following 3 sequels to this game, even though they're not directly connected, but whatever. Silent Hill is, in fact, one of the best horror games of all time. No question about it. So, and the fact that this was their first game, this was the first game that they made, and it was this damn good, is a testament to the people who worked on that. Like, wow. I don't know what else to say other than good job. You made you made a game from 1999 timeless as far as horror. Like, it's really genuinely that good. Trust me, go watch my stream of it 2 years ago. It was insane. But I'm not gonna lie as well. That's not the only game that was able to cook a lot of things up for being the first game by a specific studio. Take, for instance, Roller Coaster Tycoon, released a month or two afterwards, I think around like February, March-ish. And keep in mind, this was only made by like one guy. Yes, a simulator of one of the most influential simulation games of the past 25 years. One guy made it. That's impressive in and of its own. Now, obviously, this game is a lot more of a traditional computer game, because keep in mind, yes, while 3D was still was starting to dominate as far as the gaming industry, it was still somewhat new at the time for video games. And so games like Roller Coaster Tycoon still relied on 2D isometric sprites for its gameplay. But even then, I would still argue that the game aesthetically holds up because of its art direction. And I think that overall, it's just a fun management simulator for making your own theme park. Even though you might have to make some hoops nowadays, but whatever. We're not judging them based off of how they are now. We're judging them based off of how they were back then. And back then, this game was extremely impressive. So, I gotta give credit where credit is due. And yes, leading into the next game, this was also the year that began the Tony Hawk franchise with Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 1. Though, if I'm going to be honest, this game, while I do give it credit where credit is due, this was Neversoft's first big foray into the gaming sphere. And this game obviously would lead to a massive franchise for skateboarding games. I will admit, this is not the best in the series, by a long shot. They still had a long ways to go as far as impressing people with skateboarding games. Though that's not to take away from how important this game is, and even just kind of starting the beginnings of all the ways that you actually do stuff, like ollies and flip tricks with a controller. It's obviously not the first skateboarding game to ever exist, but it was definitely the first game that made skateboarding games cool. And so I have to at least give it that, like, a nominee on principle alone, even if it's not a game that I would say is, a masterpiece. So do keep that in mind. But then we got Homeworld, which was Relic Entertainment's first foray into the gaming industry with the RTS. And, well, I want to say this is technically the first 3D RTS game. Unless if you want to count something like Dungeon Keeper 2, which of course we'll get to that in a later down the line, slight spoiler alert. But like as far as traditional RTS games are concerned, yeah, this is the first true, like, when what people think of RTS, this is the first game of that style to come out. And it was impressive, especially since this one was a lot more focused on space combat. And while you can definitely say that its sequel might have improved on a lot of other things, as well as the expansion turned spin-off that came out a year later, I would still say that Homeworld is a decent game to try to get back into, if that makes sense. I don't know. If you want to know about the history of the RTS, Homeworld is still a good game to try to check out for yourselves. And, well, last but not least, we've got ourselves the original Medal of Honor. And this one's kind of weird, because even though the studio, at least at its core, stuck around for the longest time, it went through multiple different name changes over the 15 years that it was around. But rest assured, it was the same studio that worked on every single Medal of Honor game from the original all the way up to 2012's Warfighter. And this game is very important as far as console FPS games are concerned. I would argue that it is very important. And I think it's pretty fun. Yeah, the controls might be a bit awkward, especially since you have to use the you might have to use the D-pad as opposed to the analogs, although you can button it out to where it feels more modern in a sense. And yeah, definitely on the more basic side, but I still think it's fun nonetheless. So I guess that just then leads us to who's going to be the exact choice. Because there's a lot. There's a lot that you can make a good case as far as what the best game for this category should be. But of course, I already made the slideshow, so we already know that it's going to be in here. So let's go over the winner. I feel like no matter what I'm going to say, people are going to be upset. But it's the nature of my show, so it is what it is. So the award for the best game by new studio for 1999 goes to... And by the way, I do apologize if you hear any background noise. It's my cousins. Roller Coaster Tycoon. I will admit, I was debating on between this and Homeworld, but I ultimately chose Roller Coaster Tycoon because I think that this game influenced the general simulation genre more than Homeworld influenced the RTS genre. Although that's not to take away anything from Homeworld. Homeworld is still a fantastic game. But why did I choose this? Well, first of all, being a business simulator, of course, it allows you to build your own theme parks. But what made this different compared to most other simulator games at the time is it was a lot more flexible with its gameplay. you were able to now obviously sorry. God, I forgot what I was going to say. Oh yeah. Well, yes, this game does have a bit of a career mode, and there's still different challenges that you can set yourself to achieve. Hell, even just a bunch of preset maps where you have to figure out how to make a certain amount of money in a certain amount of time, or make the most exciting roller coaster or something like that. This was one of the earliest games where it allowed you to have a lot more of a free choice to either solve your problems that are within the game itself, or just straight up allow you to build whatever you want while still being able to be successful in game. And I like that more flexible approach to a simulator like that, because it's not extremely linear in that regard. And that's something that I gotta give credit where credit is due with this game. And it's helped that this game has very dynamic, it has a very dynamic economy with it. And even the guest satisfaction can randomize depending on how well you maintain or construct your attractions. And I think that is something that was pretty much is taken for granted now, but back in the day was a big deal. And of course, as I've already said, this game laid the groundwork for not just not just theme park simulators, but just business simulators in general. And so I do think that this game deserves a lot of credit for what it was able to achieve. And let me remind you, this game was made by one guy. Like, what was the guy's name? I need to look up the guy's name, but I still can't get, like, for a game from the late 90s to have been made by one dude, I have to give this the win. So yes, Chris Sawyer, because this was before Frontier was formed. So yeah, that's insane. Yes, he did work on another series, Transport Tycoon, but that wasn't nearly as successful as this. So, of course, I'm going to give this the win. So, yeah. That, again, 1999, pretty good year. So that should set the tone for the other categories from this point onwards. And that momentum continues going into the action-adventure category, which, of course, keep in mind, this includes not just action dash adventure games. It will also include horror games, as we'll get into in a second. But I will admit, 1999 was a good year for this category, but there's definitely better categories for this year overall. Because this is one of the few categories that I could not find like a full thing for. Not because I couldn't find the games, it's just, admittedly, I feel like some of the games that could have been potential choices, I don't know if they would have been the best choices, personally. But I still think that what I ended up choosing here, most people are going to agree regardless. So let's go over it. Of course, we're going to nominate Silent Hill for this category again, for very obvious reasons. This game is genuinely terrifying, and I still think that it is amongst one of the best horror games ever made. But as far as the other games, I am going to give a nod to Legacy of Kain, Soul Reaver. Now, Legacy of Kain has been around for a while at this point, but this was the game that I feel like kind of stuck around for the longest time. Hell, they remastered this and its sequel, so that should tell you that Soul Reaver is a bit of a household name. And this was one of the games that I feel like was able to blur the line between being cartoony without it being a platformer. Because I guarantee you, that if this game, like most games from around this time, if you had a design like that, they would have made you like turn it into a platformer. But no, they stuck to their guns, stuck with a more visually cartoony-ish look. I say cartoony in air quotes because obviously late 90s. And that works. I think that this definitely paved the way for a lot of the 2000s games to kind of take a similar approach. And I'll even admit this, the gameplay in this, I've since played this since the last time we talked about Soul Reaver. And yeah, no, I definitely do think that the game, I can definitely see the appeal for sure. And so I definitely wanted to give it a nod. But lest we forget, yes, this might have been the year of Silent Hill, but let's not forget that this was also the year of the original Resident Evil 3. Codenamed Nemesis at the time. And okay, this one is another one that I will admit is kind of awkward because I mean, I think I've made it pretty obvious with some of the other episodes before that I'm not the biggest fan of like the older Resident Evil games, not because they're bad games, because they're not. It's just I've never really liked the way that the camera works, because it's fixed cameras, which with tank controls I don't particularly like. That being said, I still think that Resident Evil 3, despite some of its faults, I still think that it is a game that I still think I could recommend and thus nominate here because of the fact that they really did make Nemesis into kind of an intimidating threat. And they started to do a lot more action-y bits within this game compared to the first two, because the first two games are definitely survival horror games. And this game is still a survival horror game as well, but it started to lean more towards into the action department. And for better or for worse, that kind of was the direction that they were going to take Resident Evil. And of course, continuing Jill Valentine's story, who she was left out in Resident Evil 2. Continuing her story in this, I think definitely helps connect the first two games, because this is both a prequel and a sequel. I think it helps that sort of general gameplay in a sense. So I feel like it makes sense to at least have this as a nod, like a nominee. And then we got Grand Theft Auto 2. Now, keep in mind, this is not how GTA is nowadays. Because, well, for those who don't know, Grand Theft Auto 3 was the first 3D open world game in the GTA series. And while, yes, this is still an action-adventure game, it is not 3D. It is a 2.5D top-down action game. And if I'm going to be honest, this thing barely scraped to the nominee, because from what I can gather, this is a lot of people's least favorite GTA game. But it's not to say that it still didn't get a lot of praise. And I still at least get the appeal, even if the story is hilarious, considering this game takes place in 2013. Yeah, a game released in 1999 about 2013. You can probably imagine how they saw what they thought the 2010s were going to be like. But I don't know. It's just one of those things that's just, you can take it or leave. That's all I'm gonna really say. Is it's fine for what it is, but don't expect it to be like the most grandiose thing in the GTA series. Especially since this game, admittedly, in comparison to the other GTA games, is kind of forgotten about. But I still recommend it if you are more interested in the more 2D style. And then last but not least, we've got ourselves Tomb Raider: The Last Revelation. So this, or the Revelations. Wait, no? I don't know. Sorry, I'm just reading like what it says on the picture there, but whatever. Tomb Raider 4. We'll just call it that. In a lot of people's eyes, this was the last good Tomb Raider game of the PS1 era. Because yes, there was Tomb Raider Chronicles that was released a year later, but that was not as well received compared to the previous games. And, well, this game, I think, is actually still pretty cool. Even if you can tell they were starting to run out of ideas. And by the way, I know I am criticizing these games. That's because it's not because I think these games are bad. Because no, they're all good games, of course. Otherwise, I wouldn't have these nominated. But I just want to at least be real about a lot of the criticisms that people had back then and nowadays as well. But of course, more so criticisms from back in the day. And basically, people saw this as sort of the true ending, and a very satisfying one. Especially since this one, I think, was a bit more Egyptian-themed as far as the general story and the structure of the levels here. Which makes sense, since she's an archaeologist, and that's like the place when you think of archaeology. And just kind of having that finality, I think, works. And it is unfortunate that they did not remaster this alongside the first three, for whatever weird reason. I feel like they should have done that, but it is what it is. So basically what I'm trying to say is, if you wanted like a good conclusion to the Tomb Raider trilogy, this is a decent entry in that regard. And it's going to feel very similar to the previous games. But, of course, we can only choose one winner. And I feel like you guys are probably going to know what's going to win here. So, let's do it. So, the award for the best action-adventure game of 1999 goes to Silent Hill. How could it not be Silent Hill? How could it not? Because there are so many good things I can say about this game. And again, keep in mind, I wasn't even old enough to be able to play this game when it first came out. But even 25 years later, I see the appeal to this game. And I understand fully why this game is as highly reviewed as it is. It has one of the creepiest atmospheres that a game from this time period, and even compared to today, has. It also has, honestly, well, yes, kind of tricky puzzles that you have to solve. I actually think the puzzles are kind of cool. It breaks up the pace of either going away or fighting a bunch of the monsters that you encounter here. It allows for a lot more of sort of brain. I see them kind of similar in the way in which the puzzles in something like Half-Life 2 work, in that they're not really meant to be the main gameplay. They're more so, little like teasers for you to be able to progress later on. Though, of course, the puzzles in this game are definitely a lot more involved than the ones in something like a Half-Life 2. But I still think that it works in this game's favor. Also, the reason why I do give this game a lot of praise, compared to a lot of other survival horror games from around the late 90s, is, well, Something I already mentioned earlier about the camera with Resident Evil 3. Early Resident Evil games were notorious with the tank controls and the fixed cameras. I didn't have a problem with the tank controls, but the fixed camera was annoying to me. Silent Hill fixed that by having it to where the camera is tied is basically tied to the position of your character, and just like any other game from around this time. And that works. I think that works extraordinarily with the gameplay, which of course also, and I didn't put this as a bullet point, this game can both be like, the difficulties I think are pretty fair and balanced. If you want to play the game for its story, just go play its easy mode. If you wanted to play for a challenge, go play its hard mode. And, well, the fact that this game has a bunch of multiple endings you can go for really does make your choices matter overall. But last but not least, despite the fact that this game came out 25 years ago, it is still one of the scariest games I have ever played, if not the scariest. The fact that the game from 1999 can creep me out as much as it did is a true testament to Team Silent and the people who took charge in this project. There are horror games nowadays that do not even hold a candle to how dingy this game is, or just how just straight up terrifying this game is in certain seconds. It really is kind of sad. And I'm just going to preface this right now. Obviously, there's good horror games that are made more recently. It's just, at least in my opinion, if I want to play a horror game, I want it to be a lot more grimy, more dingy, a lot more mature in its tone. So I guess I'm just kind of, I know I'm putting pot shots at the whole mascot horror trend of the past 10-ish years. Which, if you like that, that's fine. I mean, for fuck's sake, look at the plushies I've gotten in the back. But I don't play those for the horror. This is the type of game I want to play if I want to play a survival horror game. So, and I gotta give credit where credit is due, because this game is pretty awesome. And I highly recommend you guys check it out, if you guys can, because, well, the only affordable way for you guys to be able to play this is the PS3, and who knows when those servers are going to shut down. So, if you guys can, make sure you play it on PS1. And if you can't do that, you guys know what to do. But let's move away from fucked up shit. Let's move on to something a bit more kid-friendly. Or at least what's supposed to be. Platformers. The genre that dominated the 80s and the early 90s. A genre that was, even by the late 90s, was still going pretty strong. Though, by the 2000s, it would start to wane significantly. And so, as we go deeper and deeper into the 90s, we're going to be seeing a lot more of this genre here, platformers. Though, I am going to preface this right now. There are going to be some games that I will be nominating that people are going to be laughing at. And I know people are going to make fun of me for them. But I gotta call a spade a spade. I'm going to have to be honest. All these games that I'm going to be nominating, I think are actually pretty genuinely cool. I played them myself. So, I hope you guys, at least for this first one, just hear me out. I know. I nominated Gex 3. But if I'm going to be honest, This game is genuinely pretty good. And there's all the okay. I know Gex as a franchise has a lot of faults. Don't get it twisted. Like, the whole concept of Gex is fucking stupid. And even this game is pretty dated in a lot of ways. I mean, just the whole concept of a gecko getting down and dirty with like a human, woman. It's the dumbest thing. It's one of the dumbest concepts ever. But the actual game is really damn good. And I will tell you that with a straight face. This game is pretty fun. I will admit, though, it is kind of sad. Like, I will also admit this. In a way, it is honestly kind of sad that this was the last Gex game. Yeah, for 25 years. For 25 years, there just has not been a new Gex game. And people have been asking for a new one. But it just hasn't happened yet. Although I think I know why. It's because this was originally a 3DO game, or at least the first game was a 3DO game. I think they still had a bit of a licensing with the game itself, and that caused a whole can of worms of like the licensing not being able to be distributed. So I think that's why it's just been a lot of legal stuff. Though I will say, even though that Gex as a concept is pretty stupid, it's one of those where it's just fun. It's just fun. It doesn't take itself super seriously. And for being a 3D platformer that just goes off the rails, I think it's actually pretty enjoyable. I know people think of Gex as a fucking meme, and he is a meme, but he is pretty fun. So I gotta be honest. Like, if you would have asked me 10 years ago if I would have cared about Gex, I definitely would have joined every single one of you guys. But no, I do genuinely think this is a good game. So go check it out. Though, even if you don't agree with me on Gex, you have to at least agree with me on Rayman 2. It's Rayman 2. This game was a significant overhaul compared to the first game. And, well, it knocked it out of the park. It was, honestly, I'd argue, one of the best games of the late 90s. This game is a lot of fun. Especially with its more, more cartoony fantasy look. That really did translate well from its original 2D sprite-based gameplay over to this game. And oh no, Rayman 2 is just fun. Go check it out. So that's all I gotta really say. And then we got Spyro 2, which, depending on the country, some call it Ripto's Rage. That's the version that I'm more familiar with, so we'll go with that. But this game, of course, the sequel to the already pretty damn good Spyro the Dragon that came out a year before. And this game improved on a lot of the aspects that were kind of missing in the first game. Specifically the moveset that was missing with Spyro, but also having a pretty good cast of characters. It made the game a lot more engaging, trying to play through the entire game, especially considering that this was a collectathon. And usually I'm not the biggest fan of collectathons, but adding those little touches really does make at least made me want to engage this game a bit more. And so, and of course, it's Spyro. It's Spyro. He's great. So it's a little purple dude. Which, well, speaking of collectathons, we got ourselves Donkey Kong 64, because we're not just talking about PlayStation games, because I feel like we've been talking about a lot of PlayStation 1 games, but don't worry, we got ourselves an N64 game here. And Donkey Kong 64, while it is seen as inferior compared to the Donkey Kong trilogy on the Super Nintendo, people still respect this game in a lot of ways. And I respect it for translating the formula of Donkey Kong to a 3D environment. It did feel a lot like Banjo-Kazooie, and less like a traditional Donkey Kong. But I'd argue that was funny enough for the better, especially since you are talking to someone who, well, hot take for y'all, never really cared for Banjo-Kazooie to begin with. I'm sorry. God, this is not going to be a popular stream tonight. Whatever. You can't deny that, like, Rare was still respected around this time, and they were able to, like, pump out some decent games. And Donkey Kong 64 was kind of their send-off to the IP at the time. And I think that's respectable. Especially, and if you wanted a game that was basically just a Banjo-Kazooie clone, but with Donkey Kong, like a Donkey Kong skin, there you go. But that's not it, because honest to God, we've got one more game to nominate. And you guys know how I am about movie license games. Most of the time, movie license games suck. They just straight up do. But there is one exception from this time period that I want to give a bit of an honorable mention to. And that's Toy Story 2. I'm going to be honest. I mean, I am a bit biased as well, because Toy Story 2 is definitely one of my favorite Pixar movies ever. And so obviously there's a bit of an inherent bias there. But what's more important about this is the fact that this game is actually pretty fun. It's honestly kind of surprising how much thought and care was put into this particular game. Especially considering that, like, the first Toy Story game was not very good to begin with. I played it. It's not very good. It's confusing. But suffice to say, not only is this a vast improvement, but also makes it to where, you know, just playing as Buzz Lightyear and just going around different obstacles around just the city was actually made pretty fun. Even if it is kind of weird that you're by yourself and not with Slinky and Mr. Potato Head and all the other characters. But it's still fun. And I definitely recommend, if you guys want a actually pretty good movie license game that's a platformer, this is a good choice. So, but let's go over the winner. So, the award for the best platformer game of 1999 goes to Spyro 2. My playthrough of the reignited version should tell you everything, because this game was a lot of fun revisiting. Because yes, I did have both the original Spyro and this game on PlayStation 1, but I don't own them anymore. My cousins from a different part of the family, they own these two games now, which makes me upset because, you guys know, I love collecting video games. I even have a few physical PS1 games over there. Unfortunately, none of them are Spyro. But I do, thankfully, have this bad boy that I've modded, so I could theoretically play Spyro 2 in its original form on this. But that's besides the point. The point is, Spyro 2. I thought this game was a lot of fun. It improved some of the weird quirks that the first game had with its levels, where the levels in the first game were kind of barren. This game was a lot more straightforward in its levels. Also, the boss fights were significantly better in this game compared to the first game. Like, Ganassi Gnorc in the first game, lame boss fight. Fighting Ripto in this, a lot more engaging. Which, of course, adding to that is the fact that Spyro had a lot more abilities in this, including being able to swim and climb, which added a lot more of a variety for the types of gameplay that you can do. And it's also helped that this game, of course being a collectathon, also has a lot of side missions that you can go on in each of the levels to where you can find more of what you need to find. And I think that adds a lot more engagement to your game if you add stuff like that. Also, of course, being an Insomniac game, this game has excellent music. And you can definitely tell that the music that they were performing in this, you can easily tell where they got their roots for a lot of the Ratchet and Clank music were going to be. This game started a lot of that. And I think it's definitely for the best. And of course, let's not forget about the wonderful cast of characters that were added. Because admittedly, it was kind of weird that Spyro was like the only character of the first game. Adding in Alora and the professor, and some of the other characters, I think definitely adds a lot more, like a lot more life, but also stakes to you saving Avalar from Ripto. And I think it definitely helped give this game a lot more of an engaging push to save this world. So overall, Spyro 2, highly recommend you guys check out. Now let's move on to role-playing games, which this is a category that was a bit tricky for me. Excuse me. Not because this year was a bad year for RPGs, far from it. There were plenty of RPGs that came out this year that were pretty good. It's just, most of them, I'm not going to lie, you can kind of swap them out. Once we look at the list of RPGs, you'll know exactly what I mean. Which, of course, we're going to show now. So, again, a good selection here. But notice that a lot of these are not really well-known names. Or at least known names in the current day. Obviously, Final Fantasy has a lot of weight in the present day. System Shock, I'd argue as well. But games like EverQuest, Might and Magic, or hell, even Chrono, they're not really well known. So I guess I'm going to have to give you guys a bit of a history lesson for those. But let's start off with the obvious ones first. So Final Fantasy VIII. Of course, riding off the coattails of Final Fantasy VII's success, Square Enix actually took a good 2 years to develop this game. And this game is highly revered as being one of the best Final Fantasy games of all time, with its engaging story and continuing a lot of the blending of fantasy and sci-fi. There are also a lot of people who just straight up despise this game. Like, it's weird because I see a lot of critics and just reviews on like websites. They praise the hell out of this game, but YouTubers fucking despise this game for some weird reason. I don't know why. I mean, to be fair, it's not one of my favorite Final Fantasy games. That honor would have to go to, I mean, obviously Final Fantasy VII, but honestly, I'm one of those weirdos who likes Final Fantasy IX. So, I guess I don't really have much of a say. But Final Fantasy VIII is definitely a game that it was more. It was. I wouldn't really say it really innovated like a lot compared to Final Fantasy VII, but it was definitely a game that was just a general solid game. It didn't reinvent the wheel for its time. It was just a solid game. And then, well, the other game that is worth of note for this time period is, of course, System Shock 2, which I'm not gonna lie, I was questioning whether or not this should count because, yes, it has a leveling system. It is a decently long game. There are different gameplay styles, but is it fully an RPG? I don't know. System Shock 2, along with like Deus Ex, have always been games that kind of blurred lines as far as their genre. But for the sake of this, I'm going to count it as an RPG. And if we're gonna count it as an RPG, then yeah, no, it makes sense to be on here. It's highly influential, arguably the most influential game out of all the ones that you see here. But of course, let's not get ahead of ourselves. Let's talk about some of the other games. So, let's start with EverQuest. So, EverQuest was technically one of the earliest examples of an MMORPG, and it's still around to this day. So, for being an MMO from the late 90s, and it's still around to this day too. Like not even like through like private servers. Like it's still ran by the company that owned the game originally, or at least, or I think it may have transferred a company at some point, but that company is still keeping the servers up. That's respectable. And for being an MMO from this time period, I gotta give credit where credit is due. It's arguably, in that sense, it is arguably one of the more notable names for a style of game that was pretty dominant throughout the 2000s, even going into the early 2010s. And so, naturally, I had to nominate it. It may have not been the first of its kind, for sure, but I would definitely say that it was easily the earliest that was still able to stand the test of time. So, there you go. But then we've got Might and Magic 7, Legend of Mana, and Chrono Cross. Now, Might and Magic is a series that has existed since the 80s, and it was kind of the closest thing to like a Final Fantasy or a Dragon Quest competitor made by Western Studio. So, a lot of the mechanics, they're not going to be identical, but they're going to be somewhat similar to those games. But again, more westernized. And that's all I got to really say. It's just, again, a decent enough of a RPG that if you wanted a bit more of a traditional European fantasy game, it's a decent game. But let's bring up the other JRPGs, Legend of Mana and Chrono Cross. So Legend of Mana is actually in the same line of games as Secret of Mana. Yes, this is a sequel, or at least it's somewhat tangibly related to Secret of Mana. And so if you like that gameplay, but a bit more refined, then you're going to like Legend of Mana. And, well, if you also know your Super Nintendo RPGs and you know of Legend, or you know of Secret of Mana, you are also going to know what Chrono Trigger is. Yes, Chrono Cross is the sequel to Chrono Trigger. And so all the mechanics from that are translated over to this, except it's put into 3D. So, yeah. you probably notice I'm not saying really a lot about these because, again, this year, like, I'm not gonna lie, role-playing game, it was there were a lot of, like, solid games, but I don't know if I would say that 1999 was a year that was a significant year for RPGs in the sense of innovations. A lot of these games were just rehashing a lot of what was already established with a lot of older RPGs from years past. And so, because of that, I honestly don't really have much to keep saying about a lot of these because I feel like I would just be repeating the same things with each game, except for one game on this list. But of course, we're gonna get into that. So, and I will admit, slight spoiler for the 98 and 97 list, it's gonna be kind of a similar thing. I don't know. I feel like the late 90s in general was just kind of a stagnant period for RPGs. So do keep that in mind. But in any event, let's go over the winner. So, the award for the best RPG of 1999 goes to System Shock 2. Out of all the games that are on that list, this was the one I feel like was the most innovative by far. Sure, you can definitely argue that Final Fantasy VIII is a fantastic game, but it really didn't change that much compared to what Final Fantasy VII offered. Whereas with System Shock 2, this was not only a complete overhaul of the previous System Shock game, where it streamlined a lot of the weird gameplay quirks of the original, but it was also, it basically perfected the blending of FPS and RPG mechanics together into a seamless game, almost to where some people just straight up call it a game with no genre. I don't agree with that statement because everything has a genre. And this is definitely a game that is but it's at least a game that was able to help blur the lines. And it's helped by the fact that this game is kind of fucked up. This game is a lot creepier than the first game. Because the first game, well, yeah, it had elements of horror in it. I wouldn't really call it a horror game. Because the colors were just a bit too bright. And the music was just way too upbeat to where it just didn't feel like a horror game, even though once you die in that game, the fucking cutscenes for that are kind of creepy. That doesn't really happen with System Shock. Like, that didn't... The goofiness doesn't really... System Shock 2 is not as, dated or goofy as the first. This game is straight up fucking creepy, and I think that helps with its atmosphere, especially when you're trying to go up against this AI controlling an entire space station. It's definitely more eerie, and I like that. And, well, even though you can definitely argue whether or not this is a fully fledged RPG, you cannot deny that this game was highly influential for what people call the immersive sim, which, for those who don't know, are basically games that have to do with a lot with things like physics and having RPG-like mechanics in what would seem to be what would be more of like a linear experience, because this game is still pretty linear. Think like games like Deus Ex or Bioshock or 2017's Prey. Those are what people call immersive sims, in the sense that it's a lot more freeform gameplay. And I think that is deserving of a lot of praise for this game. And so yeah, I would definitely say System Shock 2, at least in principle, should be the one to give the nod here. So that's all I gotta really say. Which, speaking of shooters, we've got ourselves the shooter category. Although before we do that, I'll be right back because I actually need to go to the restroom. So I'll be right back. All right, I'm back. So let's talk about shooter games, which this year I'd say was a good year for the FPS or just shooter games in general. Though similar to the RPG, I wouldn't say that these games were that innovative, but I still think that they're overall so. Oh, okay. Scratch that. Let me rephrase that because I just kind of thought these games were definitely innovative. It's just people don't talk about this year as far as the FPS in comparison to 1998 or 2001. But I would still argue that this is a fantastic year for shooters. So let's go over that. So the first game that we got here, Siphon Filter. That's the only non-first-person shooter that's on here. It is a third-person shooter that was for the PlayStation 1. And I think this game is pretty cool. You follow Logan because he's like a basically CIA guy, and you stop a terrorist organization. And this game is a lot more structured compared to a lot of games from this time. Honestly, it's kind of interesting seeing how much this game, I don't want to say influence, but definitely feels a lot more like how people see for like third-person shooters. Granted, it does have some weird quirks. Like again, because this is a PlayStation 1 exclusive, sometimes you might have to just use the D-pad. But I would definitely say that if you want a, I don't want to say campy because it's not really campy. It's just a game from the late 90s, so it's gonna feel a bit off at points. But if you wanted to play a game that I'd say is significant enough in the third-person shooter category, Siphon Filter I would recommend. It's just kind of an awkward game because it released between some pretty significant releases, so do keep that in mind. But I'm still rooting for it. I'm still rooting for 989 Studios. So It's pretty decent. This next game, Aliens versus Predator. So another licensed game here, but it's in the Alien universe and technically Predator universe, because this was a game within the crossover universe between both Alien and Predator that was very popular in the 90s. Hell, there were even already a few games that were based off of this. But this was the 1999 game. And yeah, no, for a what's basically still like a Quake clone, because they were still very popular around this time, which of course we'll get to Quake in a second. Alien vs. Predator was actually pretty fun. And surprisingly enough, this game is actually pretty significant in that it introduced one of the, honestly, I'd argue, one of the most popular modes in any game, period, that would become a huge staple for years to come. At least to my knowledge, this is the first game to ever start a horde mode. At least to my knowledge. I genuinely can't think of any other game that came up before that had a horde mode. But, well, yep, this is the first game to have it. And it's definitely a bit rough compared to other horde modes, but the fact that it began here, I gotta give credit. So, and even just kind of playing through the main basic campaign, it's a decent experience, especially for a movie licensed Quake clone. I say Quake clone mostly for the Marine section. If you're playing as the Alien, if you're playing as either the Xenomorph or the Predator, then it's gonna play a bit different. But regardless, I think it's pretty, for a movie licensed game, it's also pretty good. And then we got Rainbow Six Rogue Spear, which of course is the sequel to 1998's Rainbow Six. Of course, continuing its success with the tactical shooter in mind. It plays very similarly to the previous game. Hell, it's run in the same engine, just with a few slight tweaks. I remember giving this game some criticism for it not really innovating too much in comparison to the first game, but that's not to take away from the fact that this game is still pretty good. And I definitely recommend you guys at least still seek a copy if you guys can. I wish it was still on Steam, but yeah, if you want a more hardcore experience, of course Rainbow Six got you covered. Which, speaking of more realistic settings and environments, Medal of Honor, of course, is getting nominated for this category as well. Obviously, it's not a tactical shooter, but it was definitely a game that helped blur the lines between the arcadey Doom Quake clones of the past with games like Rainbow Six. And I gotta be honest, I gotta give credit where credit is due. So I'm not gonna really repeat much of what I said from earlier. So yeah. And then that of course gives us to the big kahunas of this year. Unreal Tournament and Quake 3. There has been very few direct competitors that have been major rivals compared to both of these games. You were either a Quake 3 person or you were an Unreal Tournament person. Did not matter. These games are significant, not just because of their respective franchises. Unreal Tournament, of course, for the Unreal franchise, as well as just the Unreal Engine in general. And then Quake 3 with Quake, and the id Tech 3 engine. But also these two games were extremely important for deathmatch multiplayer. So, you want to know why esports is a thing? You can thank both of these games for that. So respect your elders. It makes sense why I'm nominating both of these two, even especially since I don't even have a multiplayer category anymore. So of course, I'm gonna nominate these two for this. But are they gonna win? We'll have to see in it. We'll have to see. So here we go. The award for the best shooter game of 1999 goes to Medal of Honor. Yes. I am going to choose Medal of Honor for this because I do think that this is a genuinely really good game that not only has held up in several aspects, but is also very important for the shooter genre. So, obviously, as I mentioned earlier, yeah, the controls can be a bit finicky for current standards. At the time, they actually made a lot of sense, because keep in mind, not every single PlayStation 1 controller had analog sticks. Not every controller was a DualShock quite yet. That wouldn't be until the PlayStation 2 era, where this was set as the standard. Having a game control well will make or break your experience. And if you want to use a controller that looks like this is actually the best way you could have done it. And it controls really damn well. It controls better than you would expect. And even just kind of beyond that, its presentation and sound design was pretty good. It really pushed the limits of the PlayStation hardware. And it allows for such an immersive experience with how they were able to portray World War II in this specific fashion. And I think it was actually pretty cool for the time, of course. And I kind of already alluded it to earlier, but this game was definitely the beginning of this was the beginning of how we know shooter games nowadays. Because for much of the 90s, first-person shooters basically took direct most FPS games took direct influence from Doom or Quake. There were very few games, if any, from I'd say before 98, other than the original System Shock, that basically were just, games where you run really fast, you have a ton of health, you got a ton of ammo, you don't reload, and you just kill a bunch of motherfuckers. That's basically what games were. Games like games like Marathon, games like Unreal, games like fucking what's another one from that time period? I did an entire tier list off of this, but you get the point. Is a lot of those games were just that style. By 1998, we saw the the early beginnings of what's called the tactical shooter, with games like Rainbow Six and Delta Force coming around this time. And those games helped to really add a lot more realistic mechanics to the FPS market. This game basically looked at the aspects of both of those styles of first-person shooters and melded them into one, which is significant because you don't, for a casual audience, you don't want your game to be too realistic, otherwise it will be frustrating. But if you wanted it to be realistic but still be fun, you want to have a bit more lighter mechanics, reloading doesn't complete it just refreshes the mag, as opposed to you having to reload each mag to fill out the rest of your bullets or whatever, or having a dynamic a dynamic crosshair and stuff like that. It basically just tweaked the aspects of both of those styles and just put them into one. And I think that's a pretty significant thing, especially for console. Like, that's impressive. And, well, if you guys couldn't already tell by the obvious, this game basically paved the way for the tsunami of World War II games that came out in the 2000s. For better or for worse, this game started that trend. And of course, that would result in multiple franchises coming out that are still household names to this day. You can probably guess what games I'm referring to, by the way, but it doesn't matter. This game is important, and that is why I'm going to give it the best shooter game winner here. Also, I just realized the O is capitalized. God fucking damn it. This is what happens when you don't do a series. Like, you don't do an episode in a series like this in over a month. God damn it. So, go check it out if you guys already haven't. I'm pretty sure this is it's still very cheap to find on PlayStation 1. And you can play it on PS2 and PS3. So, go check it out. Alright. Sim Strategy. No matter what I'm going to nominate, people are going to be mad at me. Because, holy shit, this year was huge for the Sim Strategy category. I honestly just did not have enough slots for nominating games. And there's even going to be some games that I am admitting that I am already regretting not having on here. But I just decided to go with my gut. These are the games that I'm going to be nominating. But rest assured, if you are a strategy fan or a simulation fan, 1999 has got you covered. I mean, we already talked about that earlier with a few games, so let's get into some more games here. So, I'm going to nominate Homeworld again for this category. Since it did not win, it still has a chance to get something. Because, you know, being an RTS that was fully 3D, set in space, pretty cool. But I'm also going to nominate SimCity 3000, which was a direct improvement compared to SimCity 1 and SimCity 2000. This game was honestly a lot more streamlined, even compared to the previous game. And I think it allowed for a much more engaging gameplay experience that I honestly thoroughly enjoyed. It definitely still feels like a game from its era, but the fact that zoning was a lot more, like, it was a lot less tedious to do. Excuse me. Obviously the overarching map looked a lot more appealing compared to the kind of dull look, let's be real here, of the previous games. It was a lot more comforting. And I do appreciate that. And also the scenarios can get pretty crazy in this game. And so I feel like this game makes sense to be a nominee here. Going back to the Might and Magic universe, let's go to the Heroes sub-series. So yes, Might and Magic, of course, started off as an RPG series, but for those who don't know, it had a spin-off strategy series. And Might and Magic 3 is considered by a lot of people to be the best of the Heroes sub-series of Might and Magic games. Easily one of the best turn-based strategy games of its era by a lot of people. And I don't know if I fully agree with that sentiment. I still can't deny that a lot of the mechanics that we take for granted in the strategy genre, they actually came from this. So I gotta give credit where credit is due. And I gotta give this game a nod, especially for being I don't want to say a direct competitor to Civilization because it doesn't really play too much like Civilization. Funny enough, I honestly would compare this, funny enough, to be more in line with something like Total War than it does Civilization. And so if you wanted to at least kind of get a feel of a similar gameplay experience, Heroes of Might and Magic 3 is a pretty good entry point in the series. Let's move over to the flight simulator side of things with the third game in the Ace Combat series, Electrosphere. So I will admit this was one of the games I was kind of teetering on whether or not I wanted to have on here, but I wanted to have a bit of variety, so I decided to choose this, especially since this is by many to be the best of the PlayStation 1 era of Ace Combat games. This is where the controls were perfected. This was kind of where the Ace Combat universe was definitely sort of established and fleshed out, like it was starting to kind of take shape. And it was just overall a lot more polished compared to the first two games, which could feel a bit choppy. This game fixed a lot of those issues. And I think it was definitely for the better. And this game, for a console flight simulator game, it's actually pretty fun. So, yeah, go check it out. And then we got Dungeon Keeper 2, which, god damn it, EA, why can't we have another Dungeon Keeper? Again, these games came out before my time, but I think these games are fun as hell. Because for those who don't know, Dungeon Keeper is kind of a reverse dungeon crawler in that instead of you going into the dungeons and finding a bunch of enemies, you are the owner of the dungeon, and you gather a bunch of enemies, build up your defenses, building up more rooms to help you sort of defend from hostile forces. And it's honestly kind of fun. Okay, not kind of, really fun, especially this sequel. Like, in a lot of ways, it is a direct improvement compared to the first game. And that's not to scuff at the first game at all. The first game is still fantastic. But Dungeon Keeper 2, oh my god, it is kind of a forgotten gem nowadays. And I highly recommend you guys check it out. And yes, I am very well aware of the cover with the BDSM looking woman. Don't worry, it's in context. God, Bullfrog, you guys are dirty, dirty bastards. I'm just gonna say that right now. But don't worry, it's only one part of the game. I'm pretty sure this game's rated T for teen anyways. If not, maybe even rated M? Let me check. Dungeon Keeper 2. God damn it, I misspelled that. ESRB. It is rated M. Okay. So, and thankfully it's on Steam and GOG. So, it's very easily accessible. As it should be. And there should be a proper sequel that's not a shitty mobile garbage cash grab game. Please, EA. I'm begging you. But last game, Command & Conquer Tiberian Sun. So this one I feel like is also kind of a forgotten game within the Command & Conquer series. Because whenever I hear people talk about Command & Conquer, I always hear people talk about the first game, all the Red Alert games, doesn't matter which one. Tiberium Wars, and then occasionally Generals. Tiberian Sun, I will admit, is just kind of the forgotten middle child of the series. And I don't think it's entirely fair. As far as being the direct sequel to the original Command & Conquer, I think this game has a lot of improvements that they decided to do with this, mostly control-wise, and also expanding the unit roster significantly, and basically making it into the isometric view that was with the series for a while. I think it definitely allowed for a much more easier way to see where the height elevations were, as well as where your troops were. And I think that works in its benefit. Even if it is one of the more forgotten games in the Command & Conquer series, I still think that it is deserving of some recognition. But I will admit, this is another one of those games where it's like, is this the best nominee? Especially since there is one game that I know people are screaming at the top of their lungs I have not nominated. Who knows? But it's still a respectable game that I still at least want to give credit. But let's go over the winner. So, and again, no matter what I choose, people are going to be mad. People are going to be mad at me. So, I don't know what my accent was, but whatever. But I'm just going to go with my gut. Especially since this game is hella underrated anyways. I mean, a lot of these games are underrated because these are fucking 25-year-old games that nobody gives a shit about anymore, and it makes me sad. But anyways, so, as of right now, the award for the best sim strategy game of 1999 goes to Dungeon Keeper 2. Yes. The reverse dungeon crawler wins. The dungeon management game wins. But there's a reason for that, because this game is fun as hell. It is basically one of those games that you can play in any time period and it would still be fun. It just sucks that this was the last real game that was made. It was just a series that existed in the late 90s, and it has been stuck in that era since. And that sucks, because the base building is so much fun. And, well, it is an improvement compared to the previous game in a lot of ways. Of course, it is, they added in a lot more room variety, as well as different creatures. They made the game a lot more visually distinct with each room, so that, because that was admittedly a bit of a problem with the first game, is that a lot of the rooms did kind of look the same. They fixed that here. You don't have that problem. The camera is also much more easier to use, because you can switch between the cameras in the first game, but it changed the controls, which was weird. They got rid of that bullshit, so that was a significant improvement. Also, the AI is a lot more responsive in this game, and that helps, especially when dealing with enemies. Also, this game, similar, funny enough, to Roller Coaster Tycoon, has a lot more of a sandbox feel with like more freeform gameplay, and it also has like a bit of a sandbox mode, which was pretty fun to mess around with. And overall, just being a fantastic translation from the 2.5D sprites to a fully 3D environment really does make this into one of the best simulation games of its era. Go check it out, especially since they just released this game on Steam literally earlier this year. There's no excuse for you not to check it out. Do it right now. You will not regret it. So, hell yeah. Sports, racing, and fighting games. Again, this was another huge year, especially for the racing category. Oh my god. like there were so many racing games that came out this year that I just could not put on here because of just how much was already in here. Because I wanted to at least give a variety, so I had to sort of bow down to some games. But that, make no mistake, 1999, hell of a good year for sports, like for sports and racing and fighting games just in general. Easily one of the best years for this category. And that's coming from someone who usually doesn't give a shit about this category. So, what did I end up choosing? Excuse me, God. Well, of course, I'm going to nominate Pro Skater 1. Yeah, it may not be the best game to choose for this year, but I do think that it is a significant enough release that I kind of have to. But more importantly, this was also a very significant year, as this was the year that introduced us to the most popular fighting game series of all time, Super Smash Bros. Yes, the original Smash Bros. Came out in 1999. And yes, while it is definitely very primitive in comparison to the sequels, especially comparing to this and Melee, it's like night and day. I still think that you should at least give respect to the original Super Smash Bros., considering that it was the game that not only started it all, but just straight up introduced the idea of a video game crossover as significant as it is. It is definitely one of those games that you kind of at least, like, even if it's not your favorite game, it's definitely a game that you have to at least play once. Just so that you can understand not only the roots, but understand exactly why they decided to do that. Because video game crossovers just weren't really a thing until around this time. So I feel like it's only natural that we give it. Yes, the roster is lame. Literally all these characters you can play in most of the other Super Smash Bros. Games, but that doesn't matter. What matters is that this game gets the respect. I'm also going to nominate Need for Speed High Stakes. I've been nominating a lot of Need for Speed, although I think that's mostly because Need for Speed was definitely the franchise that it is a safe choice for me because I'm more familiar with a lot of the games from it, but it's also because it's the oldest racing franchise that I know that is still going on to this day. And High Stakes was definitely an improvement. Like they took a lot of the notes that they had with the car chases from the previous game, Hot Pursuit, applied it here. But not necessarily as the main event, more as like a side thing. But that's still fine because this isn't meant to be like a major car cop chasing game. It's meant to be just a general street racing game. And for doing that specific style for Need for Speed, this game I think does wonders. Like especially with the racetracks, and even I think this was the first game to bring back some tracks, if I'm not mistaken. So I think that's definitely worth something of note. And then we got Driver, which I know is technically not a racing game, but I just think for the sake of being able to not only give it a bit of a nod, but also filling up this list, I think it's only natural for us to recognize the Driver series. Again, like it's definitely a lot more, action, high stakes based as compared to just straight up racing to racing. Like you can definitely even make a good case that this is more of a GTA game than GTA 2 is. But it's still like car centric gameplay, and thus it is still going to just be nominated here. And I mean, it's Driver. Like it's pretty significant as far as the racing series, like game series, are concerned. So yeah, at least in my opinion, for it being a bit more on the action side of games that are a bit more on the racing side, I think it's only natural for Driver to be nominated. Which then, of course, brings us to the more less serious side of racing, the kart racer, with Crash Team Racing. So obviously, people know Mario Kart. It was, I guess, I don't know if it was the first kart racer, but it was definitely the first kart racer series to gain a lot of attention. But there weren't really a lot of them until this game came out swinging right out of the gate. Obviously, this game takes a lot of cues from Mario Kart 64, but it added its own mechanics, including a drifting mechanic, as well as a speed boost mechanic, which, I'm just gonna be frank, Mario Kart eventually took in later games and applied it to that. So this game, in a weird way, helped innovate in the kart racing scene to where features that people take for granted in the newer Mario Kart games, they originated here, funny enough. And it's also helped that this game does have a bit more of a goofy atmosphere, since it is Balash Kendakoot who's on the wheel, along with a bunch of his friends and enemies. And I don't know, it's just a fun game. A good send-off by Naughty Dog for their original major IP. Which, of course, gets us into the final game that's being nominated, Gran Turismo 2. A much-needed improvement compared to the first Gran Turismo, which wasn't bad, but it definitely was limited compared to what you would think a console racer game should be. Gran Turismo 2 definitely upped the ante in that regard. And, I mean, there's a reason why this game, I think it's like, 3 discs, which is insane. But there's a lot of content on those discs. And, well, it's worth playing through as much as you can. Because Gran Turismo 2 offers a significant amount of cars for a console racer game at the time, and really did kind of help popularize racing games just on console in general. So I felt like I needed to give it the nod. So what's gonna win? Well, we'll have to see. The answer might surprise you guys, but I think it's probably the answer that makes the most sense if we're talking about these games in general. So here we go. The award for the best sports / racing / fighting game of 1999 goes to Crash Team Racing. Yes. Crash Banooka wins. Yes, the Bandicoot finally wins in this award ceremony. Which is weird, because I'm not, like, I think I mentioned this before, Crash Bandicoot wasn't ever really my favorite as far as platformer mascots are concerned. I've always been much more of a Spyro fan. But I've started to grow in on the little orange dude in recent years. And not only that, but also I've grown on a lot of his side games, specifically the racing games, because Crash Team Racing is a lot of fun. A lot of fun. You know, it's a lot more bouncy compared to like the older Mario Kart games, but that's kind of how the newer Mario Kart games are. So in a weird sense, this game feels more like a Mario Kart game than the older, I'd say, pre-Mario Kart Wii Mario Kart games. Which is weird for me to say, but yeah, that's how much Crash Team Racing was done. And again, it wasn't uncontrollable. You can still control this fantastically. And well, it's helped by the track layouts that are actually really solid all around. Of course, I already mentioned this before, but this game introduced a boost mechanic. So basically, if you burned rubber, like if you press down the I think it's the brake button. I don't remember specifically, but if you like, you can either do a drift, or you can fill up the like a meter to where if you hit a specific like part within the meter, you can theoretically go faster. And that allows for a lot of fun and also like close races. That can save you races in this game. And of course, it's helped by the fact that this game, being a kart racer, doesn't take itself seriously at all. I mean, the story is dumb, but they know it's dumb. You know, just aliens come in and demand for like a race between Crash and Cortex and all of their friends and enemies. That's the story. That's it. Like it's silly, it's stupid, but it's fun. And well, it basically proved that you can make a kart racer that isn't Mario Kart work. It just sucks that there hasn't been that many other good examples of kart racers since that didn't have Mario in its name. But rest assured, this was a solid direct competitor to Nintendo's property, and I think that speaks volumes. So, but of course, we've got 3 more categories left. So I'm not going to spend too much time with these categories, because although this is probably going to be the one I'll spend the most time on, because I'm going to be explaining a lot here. But expansion packs, of course, are very important. They helped push a lot more sales for a lot of the games, because people might think, oh, they're not going to add that much content to this. Why should you focus on this? Well, because I like being able to give credit to the additional content that was made for a lot of these games. And expansion packs were the original bloodline for a lot of these games. Like, especially around the mid to late 90s, the expansion packs, especially on PC, started to really ramp up. So, let's go over my picks here. So, the first expansion pack we're going to talk about that I'm going to nominate is Sin, Wages of Sin, which was a bit of a story pack to the 1998 shooter. It followed our little friend John Blade on another adventure involving a different antagonist, and introduced some new guns, and, you know, continued the already pretty decent combat that was in this game. So if you liked the way that this game played, you're more than likely going to like this expansion. So just realize that being being an expansion pack for a 1998 game, it's going to be campy, but like kind of fun campy. It's very late 90s. Very, very late 90s. But in a fun sense. Like it plays it straight, but it knows that it's like, you know, pretty fun. So, and Sin has always been kind of an underrated game, just in general anyways. So I recommend it even just on those, like, on that fact. Rainbow Six is Eagle Watch, of course. expands content for the original Rainbow Six. It added in, I think it was the Taj Mahal. Fuck, I don't remember. Oh yeah, great. Big Ben, the house, like the House of Congress, and I think a few other locations I can't think of off the top of my head. But basically, it was a series of missions that took place in real life locations. And well, obviously fictionalized because not only is this a game, not only was this from 1999, so even if they wanted to make it realistic, they couldn't, but also so that they wouldn't get sued. But this game is like this expansion, I thought was pretty fun to go through, especially considering that unfortunately those types of situations could theoretically be real. So having a game sort of, obviously be a bit challenging, but also sort of educate on how counterterrorism works, I think helps in that regard, especially for using real life locations as sort of the backdrop. Of course, we already nominated the sequel, but I wanted to at least still give some attention to the expansion pack that they made right before they worked on the sequel, which of course leads us to Half-Life Opposing Force. Now, you guys know I've been a huge critic of the original Half-Life for years. I think the game is, it is a good game, but it is hella overrated. That being said, Opposing Force is a genuinely good expansion. I had a lot of fun with it whenever I was replaying it last year. And I thought that the weapons that they added in, the new enemies, the way in which the puzzles worked, I thought was a significant upgrade. And I thought that it was pretty fun. Even slowing down the gameplay a little bit so that it didn't feel too much like a Quake clone like the original base game did. So I thought that was pretty fun. Which, speaking of Quake clones, Unreal also had an expansion pack, Return to Na Pali. We also played this last year. And it's a decent experience with some new weapons, some new enemies. There are some annoying sections in this, but I really think that Unreal was a pretty fantastic game, and so having a story pack tied into it was pretty cool. Too bad that they never made a second mission pack. That's why it says Mission Pack 1. But I still think that this game or this expansion was a decent little, bit of life. Like, it added a bit more life to an already fantastic shooter game. And then last but not least, we got ourselves the only expansion for a game that was not released in 1998. Instead, 1997. Grand Theft Auto London 69. So this basically added in London to the original GTA for you to be able to drive in. Also was set in the late 60s, hence the name. And I mean, that's basically what it does. It just adds in more levels for you to be able to drive around in. And yeah, that's what it does. I mean, I don't really have anything else to say, because if you like the gameplay of the original Grand Theft Auto, you're more than likely going to like this. So go check it out. So let's go over the winner. So, and this might surprise you guys, but I think this is surprisingly the best choice. So, the award for the best expansion pack of 1999 goes to Half-Life Opposing Force. You guys are probably shocked right now, because I was known for being a Half-Life 1 hater for years. But even I have to admit, this expansion pack was really damn good. I mean, it's helped that it is a bit more like there's a lot more gameplay mechanics that they added here. But of course, since this is an expansion to Half-Life 1, obviously it's going to add a lot more areas within the Black Mesa facility. So adding a bit more context as to what was exactly going on. Funny enough, in the latter half of the events of Half-Life 1. And so you got to go around different parts of the Black Mesa facility as a HECU guy. And so you were working with the HECU, or at least the guys that weren't just straight up killing all the scientists. And yeah, just fighting off a lot of the alien threats, but also the Black Ops guys, because they were sent in to kill you guys as well. They weren't working with the HECU, as it was revealed here. And, well, that then leads us into some new enemies. There's some new aliens that they added in here, including a few new bosses that, hot take, better than the bosses that were in the base game for Half-Life 1. So, obviously that's a pretty significant thing. As well as some new weapons, even replacing some weapons here. Instead of a crowbar, you have a wrench. Instead of the revolver, you have a deagle, stuff like that. But even some new gameplay changes that they have in here, I thought was pretty cool, including the like the pseudo squad mechanic. It's not really a squad mechanic, it's just more you can control specific HECU guys to do certain tasks. Like, for example, you can have a medic heal you, or you can have an engineer take down some doors, stuff like that. And I think that leads to a lot more of you feeling like you're actually working with these guys as opposed to just kind of being a one-man show, which is the type of game that I have always kind of preferred with a game like this, especially since they slowed down the combat to where it was a lot less Quake-like and more of a contemporary shooter. And, well, you see it, but hot take, and I don't care, Opposing Force is better than the original Half-Life. So, there, I fucking said it. This is a good expansion. And I'd argue it's even better than like the game that its source code is meant to be with. So, you can take it or leave it, but I don't care. So, go check it out if you guys haven't. There are some weird quirks that are in this that I still don't like, but I still recommend you guys check it out. Alright, art direction. Again, I'm not going to spend too much time on this category because it's mostly going to be games we've already talked about on this, tier. As with most of the art direction and game of the year tend to be anyways. So, yeah, I'm just going to reveal them right now. So, of course, for Silent Hill, I'm nominating that for its dingy, grimy, but, cool atmosphere. Rayman 2 for its sort of, cartoony, fantastical, and whimsical look that they were able to translate from the previous game to 3D. Dungeon Keeper 2 for its more medieval, traditional fantasy, like dark fantasy look, that has a bit more of a cartoony aesthetic, especially for a lot of the demons. Crash Team Racing for its more Saturday morning cartoon look. Spyro 2 for a similar thing with Rayman 2, except definitely more of a fairy tale whimsical look. But we've also got Vib Ribbon, which, for those who don't know, is a rhythm game that basically emulates voxel graphics for its general game. I mean, you can probably tell it kind of looks like a very old early 70s looking game. Just, you know, it's just the model wire, which is a very unique look. This came out at the tail end of 1999. I think December of 99 in Japan, in like March of 2000 in Europe. It did not release into America until 2014, which is insane. But because there was an English release eventually, and I actually have access to it on my PlayStation 3, yeah, I wanted to give it a art direction choice, especially since like I didn't want to just give it an honorable mention. I wanted to give it a nominee, and I feel like this was definitely the best category to do so, because it's a really damn cool rhythm game. So, but let's see what wins. So, the award for the best art direction of 1999 goes to Rayman 2: The Great Escape. Rayman doesn't get a lot of love in recent years, when he's not being portrayed as someone who's like a drunk asshole, because, well, he really wasn't that. He was the cool looking dude, you know, taking down a bunch of weird warlocks and pirates and all that fun stuff. And, well, Rayman 2, of course, has a very distinct look. You know, it has a bit of a whimsical fairy tale aesthetic to it. It's kind of hard to describe it, but like when you see it, you know exactly what I'm talking about. And I think it really does work in this game's favor. And again, it basically just takes the general look of the original Rayman game and just translates it into 3D. And it's beautifully translated. Like, it works surprisingly really well. And it was able to balance out the more lighthearted like sections with the more dingier and creepier sections and meld it into something that is honestly one of the most memorable looking games of its era. Like, there's a reason why Rayman 2 and even Rayman 3 are considered to be the best in the series. And it's partially because of their amazing art direction. So, if you guys haven't already, I'd recommend you guys check out, you know, if you can find Rayman 2, either on PlayStation 2, or not PlayStation 2, PlayStation 1 preferably, although I think there is an N64 and even a Dreamcast version of this game. So, maybe even like I think there's even like a game, like, wasn't there like a GameCube release of this? Or like this was released on like another system later on down the line, I'm pretty sure. Yeah, there was a PS2 version too. So, yeah, called Rayman Revolution. So, there's really no reason for you not to play, like, to find this. Go check out Rayman 2 if you haven't. So, that then leads us to the last award of the night. Oh, shoot. Sorry, the fucking cursor keeps changing. But that then leads us into the last award of the night. The game of the year. So, this was pretty tough. Although, before we get into this, I actually want to make sure that, like, my final choices are what I want to have chosen, because, my god, it's pretty close. I'm not gonna lie. Yeah, I think those are good enough choices. So, but yeah, you can argue a lot of games can be nominated for Game of the Year. But I think the games that I ended up choosing, most people are actually going to agree with. So let's show them now. God damn it, the fucking... God damn... Okay, they need to fix that. God damn it. No! Okay, I'm cutting that out. Fuck. Okay, I hope you guys didn't fucking see that. It's stupid. Okay. Game of the year. Okay. So, these are the games that I ended up choosing. And for all the reasons that I mentioned, for plenty of these games, makes sense. So, Silent Hill, of course, it is a fantastic survival horror game, very influential even to this day. Final Fantasy VIII being one of the most revered RPGs of its time. Rayman 2 for its excellent art direction and general fun atmosphere. Spyro 2 for its continued amazing gameplay for an already pretty fantastic game. Medal of Honor for being a pretty solid console shooter that paved the way for World War II games to come. And Unreal Tournament for bringing the multiplayer FPS to a bit of a respectable level and helping influence esports. So pretty good choices all around. No one is going to argue with me on any of these. I don't think anyways. It really could be, it's a really close battle. But this choice that I ended up choosing, I think overall, you could make a case, is the most influential on this list. Even more so than you might think initially. But let's do it. I'm hoping you guys didn't fucking see that, because I'm gonna be editing this for the YouTube VOD anyways, but it doesn't matter. So here we go. The final award of the night. Let's do it. So, the game of the year of the year of our Lord 1999 is Unreal Tournament. Yes. Unreal Tournament is the winner of the Caspian Game Awards of 1999. This game is a very important game in a lot of ways. So, of course, so obviously this is the sequel to the original Unreal, or at least it's like a spin-off of it, a multiplayer exclusive spin-off. And usually, if you guys have noticed, I usually do not give the wins to multiplayer only games, because multiplayer only games I mostly have seen as a bit of a problem. But this is one of those games where I'm just gonna have to be straight up, is the exception to the rule. Because, well, mostly because you can actually play offline, but I'll get to some of the stuff in a little bit. So, first of all, this game has a ton of game modes that was released off the bat. You know, stuff like Capture the Flag, your team deathmatch, your regular deathmatch, some variants of some of those modes, even having a objective-based mission mode, where you do like a certain you basically do like a series of objectives throughout the map. And, well, I think that's pretty fun. It's very, they brought it back in Unreal Tournament 2004. And, hell, even some other games, like, from more recent years, like Battlefield 1 and 5's operations, and Call of Duty World War II and Modern Warfare 23's War Mode, those are directly inspired from that mode here. And those are some of my favorite modes in some of the more recent games in those franchises. So there's that. Also, of course, this game introduced some of the most iconic maps of all time. Like, who could not forget about Two Towers? One of, or I think it's called, like, what? It's called Two Towers, right? No, god damn it. It's like Facing Worlds, excuse me. That's what it's called. I apologize. I'm a fake fan. But yeah, Facing Worlds. One of the most iconic maps just in general. But I mean, that's just one of the most iconic maps just in general. Of course, yeah. Morpheus is another one that I know a lot of people love. Nebula, Neo Tokyo, Mogel, Megaplex. Like, there's so many maps that like you can list. Like, and the list is long too. 178 maps by the end of the expansion pack life cycle went into Unreal Tournament. That is an insane amount of maps that you could never see in any game nowadays. So you get your bang for your buck if you get the Game of the Year edition of this. And this game for 1999 was visually incredibly impressive. You know, it pushed the limits of the Unreal Engine in a lot of ways. And well, this is where this is why I mentioned that this is arguably the most influential like game that is nominated for 1999. This, along with Quake 3, helped popularize multiplayer games as a whole. Yes, multiplayer games did exist beforehand, but they were relegated to like either side modes or they were like a one-person co-op mode. But as far as online PvP multiplayer, this and Quake 3 really were the games that pushed the door down as far as making that a mainstream thing and pushing the idea of competitive esports. Without Unreal Tournament in Quake 3, frankly, esports, I mean, they probably would exist, but it would be years later. And so, like, yes, online PvP did exist with other games, like the original Quake, the original Doom, and Doom 2 even had some online multiplayer capabilities. But those were very limited. And you had to do a million hoops just to try to connect to a server. Whereas with Unreal Tournament, you can just do it instantly. Which I guess then brings up the question, why am I not, like, nominating Quake 3? Well, it's because, if I'm going to be honest, I just like the general feel and just the way in which Unreal Tournament plays. It's a lot more, like, it's a little bit slower, but the shooting, I just feel like, is a lot more my style. And, well, this game came out, 10 days before Quake 3, which is insane. And so, naturally, I choose this. So, and of course, as a bit of a bonus, you see, this game had a ton of mod support. So, that's a given. Though, there is one unfortunate catch to this. So, even though I am nominating this as the Game of the Year for 1999, unfortunately, Epic Games did remove this from all platforms across the internet, meaning you can no longer buy this game. You're going to have to pirate it if you want to play it. Unless if they eventually change their mind and release it on their stupid Epic store. I'd rather them do that than just straight up not have it. So that's ultimately my recommendation for you guys to play this, because there's no reason for you guys not to be able to play one of the most influential games just in history. Go check out Unreal Tournament. That is ultimately, I guess, the takeaway for tonight. But yeah, let's recap, shall we? So, of course, going order by order for the awards. For the best game by new studio, we gave it to Roller Coaster Tycoon. For the best action adventure, we gave it to Silent Hill. The best platformer, we gave it to Spyro 2. For the best RPG, we gave it to System Shock 2. For the best shooter game, we gave it to Medal of Honor. For the best sim strategy, we gave it to Dungeon Keeper 2. To sports racing fighting, we gave it to Crash Team Racing. To the best expansion, we gave it to Half-Life Opposing Force. Best art direction went to Rayman 2. And the game of the year went to the original Unreal Tournament. As far as my personal top 10 favorites, I'm not gonna lie, I've been swapping them a lot, so this is not a definitive list, and keep in mind this is in no particular order, but as of right now, this is what I'm feeling as far as like my personal favorites from this year. So my personal favorites as of right now are Silent Hill, Rayman 2, Roller Coaster Tycoon, Spyro 2, Dungeon Keeper 2, Homeworld, Rainbow Six Rogue Spear, Medal of Honor, Unreal Tournament, and Quake 3. And, well, I already mentioned that there are a lot of honorable mentions, so much so that it filled up the entire page you're about to see in a second, which just kind of proves that even though that there were some categories that were admittedly kind of iffy, there were still a ton of games released this year that still make up for that, making this easily one of the best years in gaming history. So, honorable mentions that we have here include Crazy Taxi, Sid Meier's Alpha Centauri. I wanted to throw a bone to Chocobo Racing because, I mean, yeah, it didn't get received well, but I thought it was cute. Jammer Lammy being a pretty cool rhythm game. X-Wing Alliance. Warzone 2100, the Team Fortress Classic remake of the original mod for Quake, put into the source, like the gold source engine, Jagged Alliance 2, Star Wars Episode 1 Racing, Persona 2 Innocent Sin. I'm also going to throw a bit of a bone to Dino Crisis, not because the game itself was great, but because, being a Resident Evil clone that was okay. So I was originally debating on whether or not I was going to have that in the action adventure category, but I decided not to. But Lego Racers as well, specifically the PC version. And then, of course, you see it right behind me. Yes, I did not forget, people. Age of Empires 2. Don't worry, I didn't forget. It's just, there were just so many other games. So, don't worry. I remembered it. It's just, there were already so many other games. And hell, you can probably swap this out with Command & Conquer Tiberium Sun and people would not complain. And of course, we got Parasite Eve 2. So, as another sort of horror RPG. But yeah, that was the Caspian Game Awards for 1999, a fantastic year as far as video games. And so yeah, that was pretty awesome. But again, I hope you guys did enjoy. Again, I do apologize for the fact that I've not been streaming a lot. It's been a long week, and also it's been kind of a long few months for me. I will try to get back into the swing of things. And I hope to get that video done by Thursday because it's going to be very important to me personally. And yes, that, of course, I will be making sure that this Saturday I will be doing the 1998 list, or the 1998 episode. So I hope you guys are excited to see that. We'll make sure we go all the way to the middle of the 90s. And yeah, I'm excited to see that. But of course, I hope you guys did enjoy this. If you guys did, make sure to hit that follow button down below and turn the bell icon if you're watching this on Twitch. If you're watching this on YouTube, make sure to hit the subscribe button and hit the bell icon over there as well. While you guys are at it, make sure to check out the links down below. Discord, SoundCloud, of course. If you guys haven't already and you're watching this on Twitch and you want to directly support me, you can also hit the subscribe button. If you can't necessarily do that, that's completely fine. I'm just glad that you guys take time to watch this. But regardless of all that, though, make sure to share the stream to other people as well and continue helping people in the process. But until then, I'll see you guys in the next one. Have your night and peace out. Bye.